It was a bright morning in a small American town. People were busy as usual, cars rushing, people laughing, and workers entering tall buildings. Among them walked an old man. His clothes were old, his shoes covered in dust, and his back slightly bent. In his hand, he carried a small brown sack, worn out and tied with a rope. No one really looked at him twice. To most, he was just another poor man wandering around town. But his eyes were calm, sharp, and steady, like someone who had seen the world change many times. He walked slowly toward a big white building, National Crown Bank. It was one of the largest banks in town. The glass doors shone bright, the logo sparkled in gold, and inside were men in suits talking proudly about money and success. The old man stopped in front of the bank. He took a deep breath, looked at his sack, and whispered softly, "Let's end this today." Then he entered inside. The cold air of the bank hit him. People stared, some whispered, some frowned. He looked out of place. The receptionist, a young woman in a neat blue uniform, forced a polite smile. "Sir, can I help you?" she asked. The old man nodded slowly. "Yes. I would like to meet the bank manager." She blinked. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" "No," he said calmly, placing his sack on the counter. "But tell him, the owner of this bank has come." The woman froze. Then she laughed nervously. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" He repeated, still calm, "Tell your manager, the owner of this bank wants to see him." Now people around started to whisper louder. "Did he say owner? Look at his clothes. He must be crazy, maybe he wants a loan." The receptionist pressed a button under her desk and called security just in case. Soon, 2 guards walked in. "Sir, please step aside," one said politely but firmly. The old man didn't move. He opened his sack slightly, and the sound of something metallic came from inside. Everyone held their breath. One of the guards reached for his walkie-talkie. "I'm not here to cause trouble," the old man said, his voice calm but strong. "I'm here to claim what is mine." Just then, the bank manager, Mr. Robert, came out of his glass office. A tall man with shiny shoes and a proud face. He walked toward the old man with a confident smile. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked. The receptionist whispered, "He says he owns the bank, sir." "Ah!" The manager laughed loudly. "Owns the bank? This man?" He looked at the old man from head to toe. "Sir, I think you're mistaken. This is private property. Please leave before we call the police." The old man looked straight into his eyes. "You can call whoever you like. But before you do, maybe you should check the bank's founding records. Year 1965. You'll find a name." "My name." The manager's smile faded for a second, but quickly returned. "All right, enough jokes. Security?" Before he could finish, the old man opened his sack fully. Inside was an old bundle of papers, brown, dusty, but neatly kept. At the top of the stack was a bank ownership certificate, stamped and signed. The manager frowned. "Where did you get that?" "I didn't get it," said the old man quietly. "I earned it." Now the entire bank lobby was silent. Even the guards hesitated. The old man carefully placed the papers on the counter and looked around. "You all think I'm just a poor man. But this bank stands where my small savings office once stood before they took it from me." His voice trembled slightly, but his eyes stayed fierce. "And today," he said, tightening his hand around the sack, "I'm here to take it back." The manager stared at the papers, confused and nervous. People began recording the scene on their phones. The air was thick with tension. Nobody knew what would happen next. And then the old man smiled, a slow, mysterious smile. "You laughed when I lost everything," he said softly. "But let's see who laughs now." Everyone in the bank stood frozen. The sound of the old man's voice echoed in the air, mixing with the quiet hum of machines and whispers. The manager, Mr. Robert, stared at the papers on the counter, unsure whether to laugh or panic. Sir Robert said slowly, trying to sound calm, "These papers? They look old. Maybe they're fake. Where did you even get them?" The old man looked straight at him. "From the same place your bank got its first dollar from my office 50 years ago?" People gasped. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Is he serious?" The old man gently placed his hand on the yellowed ownership paper. This certificate has my name, Benjamin Carter. Once upon a time, I was the founder of Carter's Savings and Loans. It stood on this same land. Until one day, it didn't. Robert crossed his arms, pretending to smile. Mr. Carter, even if that's true, this is National Crown Bank now. Things change. You can't just walk in here claiming ownership because of an old piece of paper. Benjamin's eyes darkened. Things changed? Yes. But some things were stolen. The room went silent again. Benjamin slowly opened another folded paper. It was a legal agreement. Yellow with age, but marked with clear stamps and signatures. This, he said softly, is the contract I signed with a man named Edward Crown, your founder's father?
Robert frowned.
That's impossible. My grandfather was Edward Crown? Benjamin nodded. Yes, I know. He came to me in 1965. He wanted to invest in my small bank. He promised me partnership, 5050 ownership. But one morning, I came to work and the doors were locked. My name was gone. The signboard said Crown National Bank. My account, my money, my dream, everything disappeared overnight. The young receptionist's eyes widened. What did you do then? Benjamin smiled sadly. I was poor, black, and old-fashioned. The law wasn't kind to people like me back then. No one listened. I tried to fight, but they laughed. So, I left town. But I never threw these papers away. He lifted the sack and shook it gently. I spent years collecting proof, small details, witnesses, letters. I waited for the right time. And now, I'm back. Robert's voice grew uneasy. You can't prove this. There's no record in the system. We own this land legally. Benjamin raised his eyebrows. Do you really think a man who lost everything didn't learn how to keep evidence safe? He pointed toward the dusty window. There's a small notary office across the street, still run by the son of the man who stamped these documents. Call him. Ask him if the name Benjamin Carter means anything. The crowd murmured again. Some people were recording everything now. A few even whispered, what if he's telling the truth? Robert hesitated. For the first time, he looked unsure. Fine, he said, pulling out his phone. I'll call. He walked a few steps away and spoke softly on the phone. The old man stood quietly, his hands resting on the counter, his eyes filled with memories of the days when this bank was just a dream built with hope and honesty. After a few minutes, Robert returned. His face looked pale. Well? Asked Benjamin. Robert swallowed. The man confirmed it. He said his father did notarize documents for a Benjamin Carter, but that was decades ago. Benjamin nodded. So now you believe me? Robert looked around nervously. It doesn't prove ownership. Maybe it was a mistake. Benjamin's lips curved into a knowing smile. You're right. Words don't prove it, but numbers do. He untied the sack again, this time pulling out a small black ledger, old but neat. This, he said, has the financial records, partnership entries, and profit statements from 1965 to 1968, signed by your grandfather himself. The crowd gasped again. Robert stepped closer, flipping the pages. His hands started shaking. Every page had Edward Crown's signature. Benjamin leaned closer and whispered, I told you, young man. I didn't come here to beg. I came to reclaim. Robert's face turned red. This can't be true. My grandfather would never, Benjamin interrupted gently. Oh, he did. And now you have two choices. Check the bank archives, or let the world see these papers. The tension in the air was thick. People outside the glass doors started gathering. Watching through the window, Benjamin looked at the crowd, then back at Robert. His voice was calm, but his eyes were burning with quiet fire. You can call me crazy, he said, but by the time this day ends, you'll wish you hadn't. The silence in the bank grew heavier. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the old man, Benjamin Carter, as he stood calmly with his worn-out sack and old ledger. The manager, Robert Crown, looked pale, his confidence slipping away. Outside, people were pressing their faces against the glass, recording videos on their phones. Inside, employees whispered nervously. Some looked at Benjamin with pity, others with growing respect. Robert cleared his throat. Mr. Carter, I don't know what you're trying to prove here, but this is not the way to. Benjamin raised his hand gently. This is the only way. I spent years being silent. Now it's time to speak. He placed the ledger on the counter again. These signatures belong to your grandfather, don't they? Robert hesitated, staring at the ink marks. Yes, they look like his. But this doesn't mean anything now. Benjamin smiled sadly. It means everything. These pages show he was my partner. Half of this bank's foundation was built on my money. Your grandfather used my trust and my dream to build his empire. Robert's jaw tightened. Even if what you're saying is true, the world won't believe a story this old. You have no official record. Benjamin looked at him with quiet strength. I knew you'd say that. He opened the sack once more and took out a small, rusty tin box. Inside were faded photographs, letters, and a sealed envelope. He carefully opened the envelope and pulled out an old black-and-white photo. It showed two young men standing proudly in front of a small wooden building. A sign above them read, Carter and Crown Savings. Gasps filled the room. That's, Robert whispered, his voice trembling. That's my grandfather. Benjamin nodded slowly. And that's me, 58 years ago. He promised me partnership, called me brother. We started that small office with honesty. I believed him. But when success came, greed replaced friendship. He placed the photo on the counter for everyone to see. I was the invisible partner. I handled the people, the savings, the community. But he had the power. And one night, I came to work and found everything gone. My name erased, my money vanished. The crowd murmured again. Some of the bank workers exchanged guilty looks, as if history was repeating itself right in front of them. Robert tried to regain control. Mr. Carter, even if all this happened, you should have taken legal action. Benjamin gave a small, bitter laugh. You think I didn't try? Back then, no lawyer in this town would stand beside a poor black man against a wealthy white banker. They said it was hopeless. So I left with nothing, just my sack and these papers. I spent my life traveling, saving every penny, waiting for the day the truth would matter. Robert's tone softened a little. And now you've come back for revenge? Benjamin shook his head. Not revenge. Justice. Just then, a deep voice came from the back of the crowd. He's telling the truth. Everyone turned. It was Mr. Allen, an old man with silver hair and a cane. He slowly walked forward, his eyes fixed on Benjamin. I was the clerk at that bank. I saw everything. Mr. Carter was the real founder. Robert looked shocked. Mr. Allen, this is unbelievable. No, Allen said firmly. What's unbelievable is how this truth stayed buried for so long. I remember the night your grandfather changed the signboard. Mr. Carter begged him not to do it. But Edward Crown said this bank will only have one name. Mine. The crowd gasped again. Reporters had started arriving outside. The glass doors were now surrounded by flashing cameras. Benjamin stood silently, his eyes glistening but his posture strong. You see, I didn't need to prove myself. The truth was always here, just waiting for someone brave enough to speak it. Robert rubbed his forehead, speechless. I don't know what to say. Benjamin looked at him kindly. Say nothing. Just remember, power built on lies never lasts. One day, truth knocks on the door. Robert lowered his eyes. What do you want from us now? Benjamin looked around, then at the crowd beyond the glass. I don't want your money. I don't want revenge. I just want my name back where it belongs on that wall beside your grandfather's. The crowd cheered softly, clapping and nodding. Even the guards smiled. Benjamin turned toward the golden sign behind the counter. National Crown Bank, he whispered. It's time the world remembers the truth. And as the flashlights of cameras lit the room, Robert stood frozen, realizing the story he had mocked might rewrite the history of his entire family. The next morning, the story was everywhere. Every news channel, every newspaper, every phone screen showed the same headline. Old man returns to claim bank ownership, brings proof from the past. People across town talked about Benjamin Carter, The man with the sack who had shaken the pride of National Crown Bank. Some called him a hero. Others said he was crazy. But one thing was clear. Everyone wanted to know the truth. Inside the bank, things were no longer the same. The staff whispered every time Robert Crown walked by. The once confident manager now looked nervous and pale. His phone never stopped ringing. Calls from the media, the public, and finally from the bank board of directors. They demanded a meeting immediately by noon. A black car arrived in front of the bank. 3 board members stepped out, all wearing serious expressions. One of them, Mrs. Hargrove, was the chairwoman. A woman in her 60s, sharp and respected, known for her sense of justice. When she entered the bank, everyone went quiet. Her eyes met Robert's. "I hope this story isn't true," she said sternly. Robert lowered his head. "Ma'am, I don't know what to believe anymore. The man Benjamin Carter, he has documents, signatures, even witnesses." Mrs. Hargrove frowned. "Then we'll find out the truth ourselves." At that moment, the glass doors opened again, and Benjamin Carter walked in, carrying his old brown sack. The room fell silent once more. "Mr. Carter," Mrs. Hargrove said, "we've heard a lot about you. Please, sit down. Let's see what you have." Benjamin sat calmly. "Thank you. I've waited more than 50 years for someone to finally ask to see." He placed the papers, photographs, and the ledger on the table. "Everything I've said is in these pages. My name was erased from this bank's history. I just want it restored." The board members examined the documents carefully. The old ink, the seals, the signatures, everything matched records from the 1960s. One board member whispered, "This can't be forged. These are real." Mrs. Hargrove leaned back, her face thoughtful. "Mr. Carter, these documents prove you were indeed one of the founders of Carter and Crown Savings." But she paused. "Legally, the name and ownership were transferred decades ago. The law may not recognize your claim anymore." Benjamin smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but history will, and people deserve to know how it really began." There was silence. His calm, steady voice carried more weight than any legal paper. Robert finally spoke. "Mrs. Hargrove, if we ignore this, it will destroy the bank's reputation. Everyone has seen the story. We'll lose trust." The chairwoman nodded slowly. "You're right. Sometimes justice isn't about law, it's about doing what's right." She looked at Benjamin. "Mr. Carter, what do you want from us now? Money, shares?" Benjamin shook his head. "I told your manager, I want none of that. I just want my name back. Put it beside your golden sign again. That's all." The board exchanged glances. The room was quiet, except for the ticking of the wall clock. Mrs. Hargrove finally said, "You will have it. But first, we'll verify every document officially. If everything checks out, we'll honor your name." Benjamin nodded, his eyes soft. "That's all I ever wanted." As he stood to leave, reporters waiting outside surrounded him. Cameras flashed, microphones pointed at his face. "Mr. Carter, how does it feel to finally be heard?" Benjamin smiled gently. "It feels like the sun after a long storm." That night, the news spread further. Social media was full of posts calling him the forgotten founder. Old photographs of Carter and Crown Savings went viral. People began demanding justice. Inside his small rented room, Benjamin sat quietly. Holding the photo of his younger self with Edward Crown, he whispered, "You can't bury truth forever." But across town, in a tall apartment, Robert sat at his desk, reading old family records. He turned pale when he found a sealed letter written by his late grandfather, Edward Crown. The letter began, "If anyone ever comes asking about Benjamin Carter, remember I owe him everything. What I took was never mine to keep." Robert stared at the letter, stunned. The guilt in his chest grew heavy. He finally understood the old man wasn't just right. He was honorable, he whispered to himself. He deserves it all. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and rain began to fall, as if the heavens themselves were washing away decades of lies. The night was long and heavy for Robert Crown. He sat alone in his office. The lights dim, the rain tapping softly against the windows. In front of him lay the letter, the one written by his grandfather, Edward Crown, decades ago. The ink had faded, but the words still cut deep. If Benjamin Carter ever returns, remember this: what I took was never mine to keep. Robert read it again and again, his heart pounding. He leaned back, closing his eyes, whispering to himself all this time, "We lived a lie." His father had told him proud stories about their family legacy, but no one had ever mentioned Benjamin Carter, the man who built the dream they claimed. Now, Robert's name, his position, his pride all felt like stolen gifts. He rubbed his forehead, the guilt burning inside. "I have to make this right," he murmured. The next morning, Benjamin woke up early. The sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. He packed his papers neatly into the old sack and looked in the mirror. His reflection showed age, pain, and yet peace. He whispered, "Almost done, Ben. Almost home." At the bank, things were different. Employees stood straighter, quieter. The story had turned the world's eyes on them. Reporters crowded outside. Every move was being recorded. When Benjamin entered, people greeted him respectfully this time. No laughter, no mockery, only quiet admiration. Inside the meeting room, the bank board gathered again. Mrs. Hargrove sat at the head of the table, calm but serious. Robert sat beside her, looking tired but determined. "Mr. Carter," Mrs. Hargrove began, "we've reviewed all your documents. They're authentic. The signatures, the property records, even the partnership agreement, everything checks out. There's no doubt anymore." Benjamin smiled faintly. "Thank you. That's all I needed." But Robert cleared his throat. "There's more," he said quietly. He pulled out the old letter and placed it on the table. "I found this last night, written by my grandfather." Everyone leaned forward as he continued. He confessed everything. He admitted that the bank belonged to Benjamin Carter. He wrote that he could never forgive himself for what he did. A deep silence filled the room. Benjamin's eyes softened as he stared at the paper. "So, even he knew," he whispered. Robert nodded slowly. "Yes, and I won't hide it anymore. The Crown family took your dream and built its name on it. But today I want to give that name back." He stood up. "Mrs. Hargrove, I resign as manager. I don't deserve this position." The board murmured in shock. Mrs. Hargrove looked at him, surprised. "Robertar, you sure?" "Yes," Robert said firmly. "This bank was built on a man's pain. It's time we build it again on his truth." Benjamin looked at him quietly. "You're a good man, Robert. Better than your grandfather was." Robert lowered his head. "I just want to make peace." Mrs. Hargrove tapped the table gently. "Then here's what we'll do," she said. "From this day forward, this institution will no longer be called National Crown Bank. It will return to its roots, to the name it was born with." She turned to Benjamin, Carter and Crown Bank. Both names, side by side, where they belong. Tears welled up in Benjamin's eyes. He tried to speak, but his voice trembled. "I never thought I'd hear those words again." "You earned them, sir. Every single letter." The board members stood in agreement. Cameras were called in to record the official announcement. Outside, the crowd cheered when they heard the news. Some cried, some clapped, and some simply smiled at the sight of justice coming alive. Benjamin stepped outside into the sunlight. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes went off, but he barely heard them. He was lost in a quiet world of relief. He looked up at the golden sign being taken down. Workers climbed ladders and slowly removed the letters, National Crown Bank. Soon, they replaced them with new ones, Carter and Crown Bank. The people applauded. Robert stood beside Benjamin, and together they watched the sign shine under the morning sun. Benjamin whispered, "You see that, son? That's not just my name. That's every man who was ever forgotten." Robert nodded, his eyes wet. "You made history today, Mr. Carter." Benjamin smiled softly. "No, son. I just reminded the world of it." As the crowd chanted his name, Benjamin stood quietly, holding his old sack close to his chest. Inside were the papers that carried his past, and now his peace. For the first time in 50 years, Benjamin Carter felt free. A week had passed since the world watched the truth unfold. The golden letters, Carter and Crown Bank, now shone proudly across the front of the building. People still gathered outside every morning, taking photos, touching the sign, and speaking Benjamin Carter's name with respect. Inside the bank, things had changed. Robert Crown, no longer the manager, stayed on as an advisor, working quietly under Mrs. Hargrove's direction. The staff treated Benjamin like a legend, the man who fought with patience, not anger, and won back his name. But Benjamin didn't visit often. He said the bank didn't belong to him alone. It belonged to every honest man who ever lost something unfairly. That morning, he came again, walking slowly through the glass doors, his sack still hanging from his shoulder. The same guards who once doubted him now greeted him warmly. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," one said with a smile. "Morning, son," Benjamin replied softly, his voice gentle. Robert came forward, smiling. "Mr. Carter, you look well." "I didn't expect you today," Benjamin chuckled. "Old habits. Just came to see if my name still shines." Robert laughed lightly. "It shines brighter every day. The community loves the new sign. People say your story gave them hope." Benjamin nodded. "Hope is stronger than gold, son. It doesn't lose its shine." He looked around the marble floors, the busy counters, the friendly faces. The same place that once pushed him out now welcomed him like family. Mrs. Hargrove entered with a few papers. "Mr. Carter, we've prepared a small ceremony this afternoon. The mayor wants to honor you for your courage and honesty." Benjamin smiled softly. "That's kind, ma'am, but I've had enough of ceremonies. All I ever wanted was truth, and I got it," Mrs. Hargrove said warmly. "Then let us celebrate the truth itself." Benjamin nodded slowly. "All right. But after that, I think it's time I go home." Robert frowned slightly. "You're leaving town?" Benjamin looked out the tall glass window. "Yes, I've got nothing left to prove. My time is almost done. I want to rest where it all began." That afternoon, the ceremony was held outside the bank. A large crowd gathered, townspeople, journalists, schoolchildren holding banners that read, "Respect the past, honor the truth." The mayor gave a speech. "Mr. Benjamin Carter reminds us all that truth may sleep, but it never dies. His story is a lesson not only for this town, but for every generation." Benjamin stood there, wearing his old brown coat, his sack resting beside his feet. When the microphone was handed to him, he smiled at the crowd. "My friends," he began softly, "I didn't come here to fight. I came here to remind the world that no lie lasts forever. I lost everything once, my money, my home, my name, but I never lost faith. And faith," he paused, touching his heart, "is the strongest bank a man can ever build." The crowd cheered. Tears ran down Robert's face as he clapped among them. Benjamin continued, "Don't measure wealth by gold or paper. Measure it by truth, kindness, and the peace you leave behind." He lifted his sack, smiling gently. "This old thing once carried my pain. Now it carries my peace." The audience applauded. Mrs. Hargrove came forward and hugged him. "You've made history, Mr. Carter." Benjamin whispered, "History is just truth written in time, ma'am." That night, as the town quieted, Benjamin sat on a bench near the bank. The streetlights glowed softly. He looked at the new sign one last time, Carter and Crown Bank, shining proudly under the moonlight. He whispered to himself, "We did it, Edward. We finally did it right." He leaned back, eyes closing peacefully, a calm smile on his face. The sack rested on his lap. The papers still inside the story of his life, his dream and his justice. By morning, when the bank opened, a guard found him still sitting there, still smiling, still peaceful. The sack beside him carried a small note written in shaky handwriting, "The truth never dies. Take care of it for me." Robert read the note and wiped his tears. The world mourned but also celebrated. They didn't just remember Benjamin Carter as an old man with a sack. They remembered him as the man who taught them that patience is stronger than power, and that truth always finds its way home.